There are a bunch of exotic weapons in Destiny 2, each with their own unique purpose and design. Unfortunately, not all exotic weapons are created equal. As the game updates and changes, there are always clear lines in the sand as to what the most popular and strongest exotics are. But what about the weakest exotics? You know, the bottom of the barrel, the type of weapon where you see someone running it and just wonder, why? Today, we're going to look at several underperforming exotics that I feel are in dire need of help in PvE. Bungie needs to send them to the gym and give them a goddamn sandwich because they are weak. Starting with Coldheart. DPS weapons come and go as metas change. Now, some of you relatively new D2 players may find this hard to believe, but there was actually a time where Coldheart was a meta DPS weapon way back in the early days of Callus and the Leviathan. Back then, believe it or not, there were no special weapons, just primary weapons and power weapons. But power weapons were really just special weapons? It's very hard to explain. It almost feels like vanilla D2 was an entirely different game altogether. Anyway, during those ancient times, we were suddenly handed a brand new weapon type, trace rifles. Coldheart stood out for being a primary weapon that was able to deal some respectfully high damage, being on par with other power weapons at the time, which remember many of which have now become special weapons. Unfortunately, Coldheart's prime is now a tiny dot in the rear view mirror, with the meta having shifted so drastically over the years since the weapon's initial introduction. As more trace rifles were gradually created, Coldheart's uniqueness did die a little bit, but that's not to say the gun is completely useless. Its base perk is straightforward enough. Keeping your laser held on a target increases damage over time. When it reaches max strength, it will start to generate ionic traces periodically. That's kinda all it does. Its catalyst doesn't fundamentally change the performance of the weapon like some other exotics, it just provides a flat buff to stability and reload. Tragically, the more you look at Coldheart, the more you realize it just gets outclassed in every major department these days. Its damage ramp up is too low to be considered as even backup DPS, and it isn't a great champion killing weapon either, seeing as Wave Splitter serves the exact same purpose and is easier to keep at high damage, not to mention that it can also suppress targets nowadays, whereas Coldheart can't. It's okay as a simple trace rifle, but to feel any real benefit, you have to really focus your build into the gun. This is all ignoring the fact that we have some really easy ways to generate ionic traces nowadays thanks to the sheer existence of Prismatic. So where does that leave Coldheart? Unfortunately, the way I see it, it's a strong candidate right now for the current worst exotic trace rifle in the game, and one of the weaker exotics in the current PvE meta. Coldheart fills a niche that is so small it barely sees any value, and it's sorely lacking in any real reason to use the gun outside of just personal preference. But there is good news. All hope is not lost. D2 sandbox changes can range from minor to damn, that's crazy, and with the right game dev adjustment, any exotic can go from awful to amazing overnight. In short, I don't think there's any exotic that is completely beyond saving. Well, except for maybe one at the very end of our list, but more on that later. My idea for Coldheart: take some inspiration from Delicate Tomb and let it really work with ionic traces. Maybe let ionic traces feed ammo directly into the mag, and if we really want to get fancy with it, why not synergize with arc even harder? Maybe some sort of volt shot or jolting on a hit when you pick up an ionic trace could really help give Coldheart some new life and have a place as an actually decent arc build gun. Coldheart isn't the only arc gun I'm gonna throw shade at today. The next weapon we're gonna go over makes me extra sad because I think it looks damn good and deserves more. Before we get into that, let me give a big thank you to Raycon, sponsor of today's video. I don't really jog in the summer. I'd rather mud wrestle an alligator than deal with running in 90-degree weather. But when I cook or do chores around the house, you know I'm still using Raycon everyday earbuds. They're the most comfy earbuds I own by a mile. With a 32-hour battery life and just 10 minutes of charge time yielding over 90 minutes of listening, it's really no wonder why I like using them. And of course you get top-tier quality audio, but with over 3 million of these things sold, kind of goes without saying. They've got an awareness mode feature, they've got active noise cancellation, they have multi-point connectivity, the list goes on. If you work out, travel, or just like listening to music, you gotta check them out. And be sure to carry your Raycon everyday earbuds in style with the protective case featuring a sick design, and make sure your Raycon earbuds are protected wherever you go. Click the link in the video description or go to buyraycon.com/fallout for 20 to 40% off site-wide on all Raycon products. Again, buyraycon.com/fallout for 20 to 40% off your purchase and free shipping. Thank you, Raycon. All right, we back. And now let's talk about heavy weapons. Plenty of exotic heavies are niche, but still quite good in their own way. Unfortunately, the Prospector is not on that list. The grenades work in a very unique way. You can tap fire them to turn them into proximity grenades, which will detonate if an enemy wanders too close or if the timer expires. Or you can hold down the trigger when placing grenades, and then when you release the trigger, they'll all detonate at once. Its catalyst is reserves and a blast radius buff, which is certainly a choice, I guess. I think Prospector's main issue to me is that it fills a weird role that nobody really wants. I'm genuinely not kidding when I say that the only time I see people use the Prospector is to be that guy on the raid team who thinks it's hilarious to launch rally flags really high up in the air. Heavy GLs in particular aren't really incentivized ammo-wise to be used as ad clear, which is what Prospector seems to want to be. Unfortunately, it's also lacking in the damage department, so both things that you'd want from a heavy grenade launcher, you will not be finding in this gun. You'd probably be better served dusting off a chain reaction hullabaloo if you kept one of those. No? Nobody? Just me? All right, I see how it is. Anyway, one immediate problem I want to point out for the Prospector right away is its outdated perk, full auto trigger system. Yeah, probably a big deal when they originally threw that together, but we literally have a setting in the game right now that allows you to do that with any weapon. As for the gun itself, it's a bit weird to think about because like we talked about earlier, the ad clear heavy grenade launcher is a role that not a lot of people really want because of how the heavy weapon ammo economy is nowadays. On top of that, if I'm going to use a heavy weapon of any kind for ad clear, you can damn well be sure that it's going to be a legendary. Reason being, one of the only times I ever use a heavy for ad clear is if I'm rocking Divinity for the sake of the fire team. Using heavy for ad clear and having it be your exotic choice is kind of wild, IMHO. Another thing that annoys me about the gun, I love the idea of the grenades all detonating at the same time when you release the trigger. But genuine question, other than using that feature to kill yourself and launch a raid banner really high, when else are you actually doing that? Because you have to hold the trigger down in order to manually detonate, that means you're going to 100% empty the mag every time. Therefore, you're either going to A, empty the mag laying a bunch of mines on the floor for ad clear, and again, I don't really want to do that, or B, you're going to hold the trigger down as you empty the mag into a big chunky enemy, which is fine, but the grenades detonate on impact, so you miss out on the power fantasy of sticking up a big boss with the entire mag, then releasing the trigger for one mega explosion all at once, which would be sick. So what if we reinvented the Prospector and gave it a new purpose? I think if we're going to go in the direction of ad clear exotic, then maybe a major ammo increase would be in order, as well as a longer duration on the grenades before exploding. You could maybe also add in some extra elemental keyword shenanigans to make it pair better with current builds. If we're going to go in the direction of DPS weapon, which is my preferred route by the way, what if we really leaned into that whole release the trigger to detonate business? What if the grenades didn't auto detonate when touching a target, but instead grew in strength every time another nade attached onto the same target, and if you stuck the entire mag into one enemy, you release the trigger and get a huge omega extra damage explosion? Can't say I know for sure what the right answer is, but I do know the gun needs help. Moving right along, we come to the next exotic on our list, Worldline 0. Now on paper, Worldline is pretty interesting. Sprint to build up energy for your charged attack. When you activate the ability by using your heavy attack, you teleport around 10 or so meters forward, which can be chained one extra time to teleport another 10 or so meters. Yay, movement tech! Unfortunately, we got a couple problems here. For one thing, the ammo consumption. 3 ammo used per heavy attack means that if you teleport twice in a row, you're using 6 sword ammo. Even taking into account tireless blade, at most you can regenerate 2 ammo with a full chain, meaning you're still consuming 4 ammo. That, combined with the lack of momentum, as well as how hard legendary eager edge swords and the mountaintop have both tag team power crept the movement game, means that as a movement sword, Worldline has so little value that it's very hard to justify using. Well, how about as a non-movement sword? I mean, Worldline wasn't really built to be a boss DPS sword the last time I checked. And for clearing ads, I mean, yeah, you can do it, but you need to very closely aim your teleport to hit multiple enemies, which can be annoying. And really, there's just better options out there to get the job done. The new raid sword, Summum Bonum, can roll with both tireless and chain reaction, and it's the new waveframe archetype. In short, although Worldline is kind of fun and silly, it really has fallen far from grace in the current meta. I'd love to see Bungie just say, fuck it, and make it a real god tier movement exotic. I'm gonna be real though, I kinda doubt that will happen, but here's hoping they do something eventually with Worldline, because damn, does that exotic look good. Now, even though we just covered 2 exotic heavies, what if I told you there was another exotic heavy that puts both of them to shame? Please meet our final candidate for today, the Colony. The Colony is a weird grenade launcher, if you can even call it that. Instead of traditional grenade launcher shots, you shoot out robot spiders that run towards the nearest target, then blow up. However, if you've used the gun at all recently, and if you have, by the way, why? You might notice that sometimes the spiders have great difficulty hitting certain targets like Vex Harpies, or they'll get their tracking all wonked up that they just run off in the complete wrong direction. A somewhat recent buff, and we use that term lightly, tried to give this gun a slightly funnier vibe. Basically, when you kill an enemy with a robot spider, it would spawn an additional robot spider, which, I mean, I guess I appreciate Bungie leaning into the meme on this thing, but it's still just not good. Guardian kills only spawn 1 spider, and so do red bar enemies in PvE. Dead elites will spawn at least 2, and a mini boss can spawn 5. But the real question is, when and why are you killing elites and mini bosses with the Colony, and how many spider shots did it take to kill that enemy? Spoiler alert, probably more than 2 or 5. Colony is stuck with being one of the lowest damage dealing grenade launchers in the game, with a perk that relies on you dealing a decent amount of damage, a catalyst that gives you more reserves, and a whopping 1 extra shot in the mag, and its other trait is just auto-loading holster. This poor creature is a borderline dead gun that feels like it's been all but completely abandoned. I mean, for the love of God, the Ergo Sum version of this gun does its job better, and it's a special weapon. I simply cannot give the Colony any sort of compliment or benefit of the doubt because it fails in so many different ways. There is truly no reason to use this gun over any other grenade launcher in the game unless you're specifically doing it for the memes. So what can we do? How can Bungie fix such a lost child of an exotic? Well, I guess it really depends on what Bungie wants this gun to actually be. Are we stuck with another exotic heavy grenade launcher meant entirely for ad clear? Maybe a PvP heavy exotic actually worth using? A dedicated champion killer? Personally, I think it all starts with damage. I think if this exotic is going to be anything other than a joke, it needs to do way more damage in PvE. That is problem number 1. If the goal is for us to actually use this gun for any reason other than clearing Thrall, it has to do enough damage to actually give me a reason to equip it in the first place. Problem number 2, the spiders yearn for more chaining. Look, I get how infinite robo spider chaining could be fairly broken, but I think more chaining than just 1 extra robo spider after killing a clump of red bars would be pretty nice. Maybe make them chain way more heavily with a much higher ceiling so it actually feels more worth it for clearing out rooms. Finally, to really try and move the needle, maybe give the gun something like subsistence or maybe ambitious assassin. If we're gonna lean into the spider chaining factor, then being able to overflow the mag would maybe make it more fun to use. Being able to dump spiders into big groups of enemies and let them clear out entire rooms with chaotic spider chaining would be kinda awesome. It might even be cool to add some sort of extra damage over time factor coming from the spiders to help whittling down beefier targets. I don't know. The bottom line though is that the Colony is my gold medal winner for worst exotic PvE weapon in the entire game, which is such a shame because the idea of shooting out killer robot spiders is hilarious on paper. At the end of the day, I really do hope these guns get the buffs they deserve. Every exotic weapon deserves to feel really exotic, and hopefully with some minor adjustments, I think all of these could be really fun and viable. Let them go from weak and irrelevant to interesting and worthwhile to pick up again. It's always nice to have an excuse to switch up my loadout after all. And for the record, I'm not a game dev, so I'm sure that turning an exotic from bad to badass is probably a lot more work than the average player thinks. But hey, all I know is that I think these guns need a bit of love, and I think they can get it. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know down in the comment section if you have other ideas for what they could do with some of these weapons. Or if you feel there are other weapons out there that deserve more attention, let me know as well. Thanks very much for watching. Peace!